How's everyone doing this morning? Great. Did you have a good time last night? Awesome. Before we get started, I wanted just to learn a little bit about yourselves. First, I'd like to know what roles you perform at your jobs. Do we have anybody here that is doing UX? Performing UX? A couple? Cool. All right. How about visual designers or UI designers? Cool. Front-end engineers? Okay, a little overlap there. And then back-end engineers? And project managers or product owners? Cool. Cool. How many know about design thinking or human-centered design thinking already? A little bit? Okay, cool. And how many of you are conducting some sort of user research or feedback? User feedback. Cool. Alrighty. No matter what role we're in, we're all affecting user experience by the decisions we're making throughout the entire development process. So it's cool to see a lot of variety of roles here today because we really want everyone involved. Whenever I see an RFP that actually mentions user experience or feedback, I get super excited. At least then I know that they are valuing user feedback, and I'm like, all right, cool. But we usually have to sell user research to them. We're still having to sell it to our clients as a value of it. For some, they kind of think of user feedback as a box to check off. So they may send out a survey and ask, would you like such and such feature? And they get some results back. 70% people will say, yeah, such and such feature sounds great. And they're like, all right, we'll go build such and such feature. And then nobody uses it. Why does that happen? They kind of miss the boat on user research and design thinking and what it all means. As we go through the slides today, we'll kind of understand how they miss the boat and why and how to kind of correct that and what to do. But how they should have really found out if their users wanted that feature going forward. Okay, so what is design thinking? A definition by IDEO, they're an international design and consulting firm that helped popularize the concept of design thinking. So this is the definition by them. Design thinking is a human-centered work process that starts with people you are designing for and ends with new solutions that are tailor-made to suit their needs. So we're right at the core of it are our users at every moment. It's a creative process based upon building up of ideas through hands-on problem solving techniques which lead to differentiation and competitive advantage for the company. So kind of rolling up your sleeves and getting the work busy. Get out the markers, get out the sticky notes, get out the pens, get out paper, get out cameras, videotape things, try all sorts of ideas here. The concept of design thinking itself really can be traced back to the 1950s. There are many key players involved in developing the concept to what it is today. There's this article at the bottom, I have a link to it, Design Thinking Origin Story plus some of the people who made it happen. And it's a pretty cool article about explaining all the history of it, who the influencers are, links to the papers that really helped spur the development. So the idea of design thinking, they just kept building off of each other's ideas, building up and expanding it, and some people added in methodologies to use for it, and it was all really, it's a pretty cool article to check out to get more information about design thinking. I'm not going to go into the history of it here, we're just going to kind of dig more into it, but that's a cool article for outside reading. So why we want to use design thinking, before we get into it, what are the benefits of using it? So we can assuring that there's a market for the product, that people are going to pay to use it, that we know that it's a valid thing to even develop in the first place. Not wasting time building unused or unneeded functionality or features. Again, going back to the example of that survey, that, just getting that survey, you could start building something that's not needed, really. Users are able to understand and use the product easily. They're able to find content. This is one that we hear often, and maybe you do as well, is, I can't find anything on your site. Well, if you're hearing that, you definitely want to start doing some user research and methodologies to understand how the users are thinking about your content. We also want to speak the user's language. We want to use terms that they understand instead of industry terms or your organizational chart. A lot of people organize their website that way. We also want to be sure that the nomenclature that we're using matches theirs, the end users that we're using. It helps develop a visual style that appeals to the users, knowing where and when to present elements, so not only where on the page, but when in a flow. Making process easier for a user, so even simple processes like filling out a contact form or making a purchase online to going into more complex like completing your taxes online. And lastly, the data will help support decision making and debates or arguments, if you want to say. So those are some of the benefits of design thinking. So what is design thinking about? It's about building empathy for our end users. So empathy is an invented word to help explain the potential we have to go from not feeling that we are connected with an other to doing so. And that other can be a person, a thing, or an idea. There's a link on realizing empathy. It's kind of a cool work that this one individual is doing, and his business, more research there, and books about empathy, if you're looking into that. I found it neat, so I thought I'd share it. So we can build empathy through observation. So here's where it's really important to observe and not always rely on asking the user. People don't always remember or say exactly what they do. So the classic example of that is when a person has sticky notes all over the computer for the login or steps in a process. So if you talk to that same individual outside of their work environment, they kind of forget that they have all those sticky notes all over the place. And you ask them, well, how is the process to log in and go walk through this? They're like, oh yeah, it's easy. I don't have any problem with it. Because they forget that they had all those sticky notes helping them. So it's easy with those sticky notes, but you don't really get that. If you're able to actually observe them in context at their desk and you see all those sticky notes, I mean, that's an ideal user research, being able to observe them in process. You would see them using these sticky notes and accessing these other information for them to get through it. So you can see where they're having trouble or what they need help with. Though we like to observe, it's also really important to listen. When we're listening, we want to hear the words that users say. When asking questions, it's really important to wait. Let them gather their thoughts and the words that they want to use. Their word choice is really helpful. It helps us understand the language and how we best communicate back to them. It helps us establish the nomenclature, sorry, stumble on that a little bit, and the taxonomy we're going to use for the website. So every time we're interacting and getting feedback from the user, and they're actually using their own words, that really helps to develop those labels, that organization, the navigation, and that taxonomy. It's all great times for that research. Also, if you jump too quickly and you maybe anticipate what the user wants and you make a suggestion, you're kind of putting words into their mouth, and they'll think, oh, that's what they want to hear. And they'll just agree, could just agree to you. You're not really sure if that's really what they're thinking or not. So really, it's important to be patient and wait. We always stress, we really want to hear what you have to say, right? Well, our actions really speak to those terms of really showing them what we want to, that we really care about their opinions and what they say. So just be patient. Those quiet pauses and maybe some uncomfortable moments is okay in research. If you're doing a user test and they're clicking around and doing something and not saying anything, then you would want to ask, okay, what is it you're looking for? What are you thinking here? Get some feedback. You want some of them talking then. But if they're just quiet and kind of thinking about how they want to respond, let that moment happen. Let them get that together. So some examples of where we can be listening is, of course, interviews. I get super excited whenever I see a client have a call center. I'm like, oh, yes. So call centers, that's when people are calling in with problems all the time. And so I asked the client, I'm like, okay, do you log these? How do you log them? How do you keep track of this? Are you actually recording their exact words? Can I sit in on a day? Cheap user research. Sitting in on a day at a call center. Absolutely love that. Of course, the other way is like emails and chat sessions. It's similar to a call center. You're looking for when they're asking questions and having problems and those. So there's ways that you can listen to users without really costing a lot of money, for example. It's also about questioning our assumptions. With input from the users, we can start to determine what the problems we need to solve. There are times we need to help the client actually understand the true problem that actually needs a solution. We hear a lot of times, we need a new website, as if a new website is going to fix everything. And it's not necessarily the situation. So a classic example of this is the scissor problem you may have heard. Instead of, we need to build a better pair of scissors, or we need to build a better website, the question should be more broadly asked, we need a better way to cut paper, or we need a better way to communicate with our members, for example. So why must it be scissors are used to cut paper? With that thinking, we would never have the hole punch. An important part of defining the problem is the question previous ideas. The phrase curse of knowledge can be very real when it can limit your thinking and your ability to approach the problem with new, fresh eyes. Historical knowledge, previous experience, and expertise is still really important, and it's definitely valued in design thinking process, but we don't want to cross off ideas just because it didn't work before, or that's the always way we've done it. We want to have a real fresh eyes to the circumstances. So circumstances that cause the ideas to fail prior may no longer be an obstacle, or another iteration on an idea could turn a failed idea into a successful one. With assumptions set aside, reconsidering previous ideas with new perspectives, and approaching the problem with fresh eyes, we have the possibility of generating multiple ideas. It's really important here not to stop at your first idea or your third idea. This is the time you really want to just generate ideas. Just keep going, even if they're bad, even if they don't really work. Just keep, iterate on them. Keep working through them. Just dump the ideas out. Don't critique any of them. Don't limit your thinking on them. Don't be like, well, that won't work because we don't have that technology, or that's going to be too expensive. Don't worry about that. Don't need to be worried about those conditions at this point. Now it's just time to get those ideas out and brainstorm. It's also really important to look at your problem from many different perspectives. So when you are developing ideas, it's really important to invite people from different subject matter expertise and backgrounds, so to get different perspectives. In the 60s, Scandinavia came up with the concept of collaborative design. It didn't get moved over here until the 80s, and it came known as more participatory design. And what the concept is everyone is invited to help make decisions, design decisions. So even at Four Kitchens, a lot of times we'll get RFPs for definition and design. And they don't want to back architecture. They don't want architecture involved. And we have to convince them, no, we need all of our team members involved, because it's those back engineers that can also help influence it. There's been many times we've gone to them and been like, well, we want to kind of do this, and we need something like this. Is there a module for that? Or is there a way to tweak this module to make that happen? And sometimes they come back with even better solutions. You're like, oh, we get that too? Oh, wait, it's like a really exciting moment. So at 4 Kitchens, we really want to have everybody involved in the whole process, and it's really recommended. Also, it's about building prototypes. Prototypes are a really effective means to understanding the ideas that have the most potential for future development. When we truly, if you're truly following the design thinking process, you will want to build cheap prototypes. Cheap in time, cheap in money, cheap in resources, just to test your assumptions. As I mentioned in that first slide about that hands-on process, so this is part of the hands-on part of it, building prototypes. Also, when I talked about that survey about such and such feature, that's a concept. It's a concept in your head, it's a concept in their head. They may not be the same, and every person you're surveying, it could be an entirely different concept. But if you had a prototype that they could work with, even something cheap, even if it's just sticky notes or sketches, they can walk through it. They can at least understand more what your concept is, so that they'll know if it works. And they can be like, well, this works really well, but I really needed this. Or this got me only so far, I need more. So sometimes it helps in weeding out what you don't need to build, but also sometimes it makes it more define and customize what you do need to build. So it can go both ways. So prototypes can be very, very simple. You can do sketches. We're not talking about wireframes here. Wireframes is too much time. We're talking about sketches on pen and paper, simple. You can even digitally, you can share them holding up to a camera. You can still share that digitally. It doesn't have to be all in person. A bunch of sticky notes on a wall showing the flow. Showing clusters, organizing information. You can use a paper template of a phone, and then use separate pieces of paper just to change out the interactions as they would interact with it and push buttons and move around. This is a cute idea that I read about. It was for developing an app for Dancing Elmo, and what the users did here was they created a very large template of a phone and then cut it out the center part where the screen is. Then using their laptop, they used that to record their interactions. So in front of the laptop, there was 2 people involved. One person was the hand activating the phone, and the other person was behind the cutout phone interacting with that hand, the dancing Elmo. And so she would push, one person would push, you can see it in the recording, push on the arm, and he would react and dance with his arm and do things. So just through this video, they were able to take that to a meeting and show them the whole concept of what they were thinking and wanting to do. And it literally took 20 minutes before the meeting. So in design thinking, there is a motto of always come with a prototype, not just an idea to a meeting. So it really helps you get that buy-in there. So we have a lot of ideas why we build prototypes. Most commonly is testing, validation, understanding if our assumptions and our ideas are correct. A lot of times we get really attached to our ideas or our research at the beginning, and we need that prototype to really validate, is that really the way we should go, or is this really fulfilling the user's needs? Do we need to refine it more so that we can continue to develop what we need? But sometimes we will use prototypes just to explore and understand the whole process. So sometimes you may start out a project with building a prototype of the end product just to see what it is. Or sometimes you'll build a prototype of just a section of it, but just a part of it, so you can experiment with that area and learn and understand to be able to tweak. And then, of course, of inspiring and motivating others, like the example of the Elmo story, where you can really get buy-in on your concept to move forward with a project. And then lastly, design thinking is about getting feedback. We want to get feedback to learn what the user's needs are not being fulfilled, where their pain points are in existing products, to validate our ideas, and to see and hear interactions with prototypes. And these are just some of the methodologies that we can use to get some feedback on different things. At any point, if you have questions or if you don't know some of the methodologies I mentioned, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about some of them, but if you don't have an idea, let me know. Yes?
Do you have these on the web somewhere, or the slides?
They will be. I'm not sure where I have to post them, but I will, definitely. Share them. So now that we have an idea of what design thinking is, we have all these different parts, and it's kind of like all over the place, kind of messy. There are a few design thinking process maps that kind of help provide structure to it of when to do things and what to do. This is one. You might see some others that use different words, but they're all pretty similar in concept. So we have kind of like three major phases of understand, explore, and materialize. And then those can be subdivided into smaller modes of thinking of empathize, define, iterate, prototype, and implement. So first we need to understand the users. We need to understand their needs, what their pain points are, their desires, what their mental models are, or their thought processes are. Then we define the problems. So first we figure out what the problems are, then we define what they are, then we brainstorm solutions to the problems, then we create prototypes of our ideas, then we test our prototypes, and then we launch our product. But it's not always that simple. It's not a linear process. Instead, it's very iterative and cylindrical, meaning that you might do one step over and over, or you might return to a previous step after learning new information. For example, after developing a prototype, you may go back to understanding and listening to your users to interact with the new prototype, gaining an additional understanding of your users that will help you redefine your design and decisions. One thing that's not shown on here that I kind of mentioned before, that you may actually start with a prototype to learn and then start at the beginning of the process to emphasize. So here you can see you can go around and move forward, or you can also jump back at different times. Oops. Sorry. But it's not meant to be a rigid step-by-step process. You're meant to adapt it to what your needs are and what your situation. Like everything in user research, the answer is always, it depends. So yes, it depends on your client, your product, your situation of what you need to do. When we get to the case study, I'll show how we kind of had flexibility to it. So when you need to choose a methodology, which one do you choose? So there are lots of different ones to choose, and they all have different advantages and disadvantages of what information you'll gain for them. So knowing what you need to learn helps you determine what to do. So this is a chart by Nelson Norman Group. You can find it online. I have a link to it. But if you look, there's quantitative on the left, your left. These answer why and how questions. Quantitative research is appropriate for, qualitative, I apologize. Qualitative research is appropriate for getting more in-depth contextual understanding of why those trends occur. For these studies, you observe the users directly to gather your data. Whereas quantitative methodology answers how many and how much questions. For qualitative studies, the data is gathered indirectly through measurement or instruments such as surveys and analytics tools. Quantitative research methods rely on using larger groups of users and to establish trends and conclusions. If you only have quantitative data, you may be missing out on key insights that could be making a difference in your understanding of the user experience, and make sure that you're solving the problems that actually need to be solved. And if you only have qualitative research, you won't know how big the problem is, how much it represents the entire population. Attitudinal methodologies will provide you with what people say, where behavioral methodologies will answer what people are actually doing. And it's important to remember what people say is different from what they'll do. So when I'm working on projects, I often switch back and forth and go from a lot of qualitative to quantitative, and also from attitudinal to behavioral to an understanding. So kind of like get some knowledge, validate against other pieces of research, kind of triangulation of data to make sure I'm understanding the big picture. So on this chart, it's also by Nelson Norman Group. They added the types of methodologies to the axes that we just had here. So we have the qualitative on the left, and you can see like things like moderated usability studies. Again, if you guys don't know anything, just raise your hand. I'll happy to explain those. We do moderated usability studies online using video, so it doesn't have to be in a lab, which can be quite a bit more expensive, especially because of travel costs. Ethnographical studies, these are similar to the fly on the wall where you're just observing, you're not interacting. So it could be you're observing a person in their office or at the hospital or in their home, for example. And you have no interactions, you're just note-taking. Participatory design is where all the stakeholders workshop design ideas together to ensure the result meets their needs. Then we have focus groups. I'm not personally a fan of focus groups. The thoughts and opinions of participants can be influenced by others in the group. This is what we call group think. So we don't tend to do focus groups. And then there's interviews. I love interviews. I love hearing people's stories and listening to them. So I really enjoy doing interviews. But you need to be conscious of how you're asking your questions, that you're not leading them, that you're not suggesting to them that you're progressing in a great order, that you're making them comfortable to open up and to actually share with you. This is one of the methodologies we'll be working in the second session. And then for qualitative, we have like the quick stream, web analytics, A/B testing, moderated usability studies, true intent studies. This is where a visitor will complete a survey they'll get a survey after they completed their task on your website. So they come, do something on the website, they had a real experience, real desire to do something, and then you have a survey with them. You can get information about like the reasons why they came to visit your site, their satisfaction or net promoter score, and some information about their profile. Some examples you might ask is like, why did you come? What did you come to do today? Did you accomplish your goal? Are you happy with your experience? Are you likely to recommend this site to others? Can you tell us a little bit about yourself to get some more demographical information? And of course we have surveys which include both intercept or exit surveys on a website and of course email surveys. And then behavioral methodologies are at the top, and you can see that they overlap some of the qualitative and quantitative studies there, and then attitudinal studies are at the bottom, and they, again, having qualitative and quantitative. And I'm not going to go over all of them because you can read. The last concept is the shape of them. So those methodologies that the participants are actually using the product, are presented by a circle, whereas a triangle is where they're not using the product. And the diamond represents either creating or using the product with the feedback provided through another tool. And the square represents a methodologies where the participant performs required tasks like user testing. And so here, this is our methodology and our process at 4 Kitchens. We kind of build it out into different phases. If you want, I can go over those phases. I don't know how many people are familiar with the concept of like discovery, definition, design, architecture, build, and then launch. If that's common to you, is it worthwhile going over? No? Yes?
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay. So in discovery, we're looking to uncover personal, organizational, business goals that are driving the project. We also need to separate needs from wants, focusing on features that will deliver value to the content's audience quickly and cheaply. We had an in-person workshop followed by a couple of weeks of research and analysis that ends with a needs assessment document. So here, what is the problem? Definition builds on the needs assessment document when we embark on a series of intensive audits aimed to identify a specific course of action to address the problems defined in discovery. Here's our solutions. Definition results in that project plan that serves as a roadmap for the rest of the project. Design and architecture phase, we develop patterns and models that guide the content, user experience, visual layout, and technical architectures for the client project. So here we're starting to put together the pieces. During build, we're building, we're prototyping, we're implementing, and we're testing components of the project throughout a series of 2-week sprints, each one aimed at completing a site feature, each sprint. And then when we launch, after it has been built and thoroughly tested, so then it's ready. And on the chart here we have possible list of methodologies that you can use on a project and when you might use those. This is a lot of research. There's never a project that does all of these. This is more like a menu where you can choose which product you want, but which methodology you want. But keep in mind, we don't want to choose one methodology from one corner of this axis. So we don't want all quantitative or all qualitative or all behavioral. We want to rotate them up to have different types of research based upon this chart to kind of balance the type of research that we're doing. So in discovery, we just do a high-level quick-stream analysis. I like to do that in order to helps me formulate questions to ask during the in-person workshop. So we have the stakeholder workshop itself. We do participatory design to help develop the visuals and priority of content. We use stakeholder interviews. You can do eye tracking and heat maps of the existing site to see where things are important for them. And then we do empathy mapping. And that's one thing we're going to work on today. Yes?
On the clickstream, is that kind of straight analytics hits, or are you able to capture, I went here, then I went here, then I went here?
So sometimes we can look at flows. Sometimes at this point, we usually don't know what the flows are. That's something I do deep dives after I start talking to you.
Are you more watching for those sequences, or do you have anything in the analytics that'll, like I've never seen it outside of usability where I could tell, from straight hits, they went from here to here to here, outside of watching them.
Okay.
I just didn't know if y'all had any tool in your toolbox.
So Google Analytics, you can see the previous path and the next path.
Oh, okay.
And then there is a behavioral flow chart in Google Analytics. I don't really like that one as much because of how it categorizes it. Like I'd rather go to the page and see before and afterwards.
I've never gone. You're looking at the top numbers, but cool. Thank you.
Cool. So then when we get into definition, we have our user interviews, and again, we have those deep dive into the analytics. So based upon what I learned at the workshop from the stakeholders, and then also what I learned from the interviews, I'm like, okay, how much is this problem real? How big is this problem? And I go look at the behavior through the analytics. We also do card sorts and tree tests for navigation. Does everybody know what card sorts and tree tests are? Okay.
I'm not familiar with tree test.
Okay, so a tree test is sort of like the opposite of a card sort. Card sort, you have content and you're putting them into buckets.
Okay.
And that's what their objective is too. Tree sorts, they're like, this is content, where would I find that content? So they kind of follow the map of a navigation and say, I think I would find it here. And you kind of validate your site map using a tree test. So card sort helps you formulate the site map, and then tree test to validate the site map.
Would you use two separate groups from the same audience?
We did, yeah.
Not inform, right? So, because I'm assuming you use card sort to then sort of say, here's my swag in the tree, and then, but maybe different people from the same office. You're like, okay, where would you think you would find it, or?
Yeah, we like to, if you can, use different users. It's cool. Yep. It all depends on how accessible user. I mean, that's always the hardest part is getting users. So yeah. True intent studies here, desirability studies or other exploratory studies to understand new features, and journey mapping. That's one of the exercises we'll be doing. And we have surveys. In design, you can do benchmark usability studies on an existing site. I usually wait to here to do a benchmark study because we're already doing so much user research and other research in that, where I personally, as a UX strategist, will have more time in this phase. And I do a benchmark usability study to have a baseline to then compare with other usability studies we do afterwards. And that is an ideal situation of being able to do a benchmark usability study. That's rarely in the budget. So then we can do user participatory design. So before we did stakeholder participatory design, here we're getting users involved. And we can do A/B testing and design elements. During the build is when I usually do clickable wireframe usability studies and kind of compare that to the benchmarks. And then after we launch, we'll use clickstream analytics to see if behavior is as expected. We can also use eye tracking or heat maps to also as a form of validation. And then A/B testing to make tweaks and continue improvement. So, okay. So this is a project that we actually worked on for Society of Hospital Medicine. And as you might see that I've already kind of moved some things around and what phase I did it. I had to adapt to the client's needs. This client not only they wanted a new website, they wanted to change all or almost all of their tools that they're integrating, that they're getting their data from, their content from. So how the users are signing in, so their single sign-on. This client also has credits, continuing education credits. So their educational tool they wanted to change. They were changing so much they even wanted to change their phone system. And it was everything at once this was happening. So their bandwidth department was very segmented and split up and stuff like that. So we just had to work with them on what the situation was. But one of the things that SHM heard from their users was constantly, we can't find anything on your website, over and over. And a common behavior is that users would go out to Google and search things, then come back to it. Very common behavior that happens, even if you have an on-site search. So SHM not only had organizational problems of their content, how things were organized, they had labeling problems, and then they also how their sitemap was arranged, their navigation issues. So they had gone through other redesigns where it was just more of a facelift and the content didn't get restructured, and they knew they did not want to do that again. And so we entered into them with them. They knew that they wanted user research and doing that. So I was excited. What is truly amazing with this audience was that this is a professional association for doctors, nurses, hospital administrators, and medical students that are going to eventually work in hospitals. They were all really invested in improving their website. They view it as theirs, their professional organization. So doctors are one of those expensive audience types that if you actually have to pay for them, you're paying a couple $100 an hour for their time. We got their time for free on almost all the user research. The only thing we actually ever paid for was we entered them into a drawing for a $250 Amazon card. One $250 Amazon card, that was it. Everything else, they all donated their time. So that also factored into timing of when to do things and pacing it out. Because in hospitals, they work 7 days on. You're 7 days at the hospital, 7 days off. And so a lot of user research had to span a couple of weeks in order to hit those cycles of being on and off to go through that. So again, kind of being flexible of when you do things. So in the discovery phase, I start out with reviewing the analytics. Again, I like to do that it helps me ask a lot of those questions during the in-person workshop. There's a lot of other stuff that we did and going on. Like there's like content auditing and content modeling and all that sort of stuff. This is just a segment of the work that we're doing that has to actually do with user research. So there's more to what is going on here. But getting back to what we were doing, in the analytics, we discovered that their GA wasn't set up properly, which is very common. But for them, it was splitting the data between the friendly URLs and the node URLs. So that made it a little bit more difficult to really figure out which content pieces people were actually going to, and like what the proper popularity of different content pieces were. During the workshop, we also discovered about their content creation process, which pretty much was like, we don't really have a strategy or a process, approval process or a workflow or anything like that. They have a lot of committees, and those committees will decide to write about something. Or one of the things that this website does is they tell them how to do improvement processes at their hospital. I want to improve how we discharge patients and make sure they're getting good follow-up is a common one that they had. And so they would write up articles on that. They end up having a whole process that you can follow and work with others in order to do it. It's pretty neat in enabling people to make improvements at their hospitals, but there is no rhyme or reason why they were choosing which processes to focus on. It was just whatever the committees wanted. So the committees would write something and be like, here, publish. So there was just no content strategy there. We had during the workshop, we had a couple sessions on priority of the content as well as the visual look and feel to get an idea of what they were going for and what was important to them. We created an empathy map during the workshop for their main audience types. Here we wanted to get an understanding of how the stakeholders think about their members and others that visit the website and what their needs are. We wanted them to think about these users, right? So a lot of times it had to kind of flip them on their head a little bit, and they're thinking about their needs. Well, what do we want to tell them? Not what does the user want to know? So we had to do a little bit of that. And then also during the discovery, I actually did 12 user interviews during discovery instead of waiting for a definition. And here we understood about their pain points and what their needs are on the website. And interviews is also another activity we'll be working on in the second session. So after we developed their needs assessment document, I went back to the Google Analytics to look at those deep dives based upon what they told me and the stakeholders told me, and also what the interviewers told me. And just to really assess, like, okay, is this problem just this person's problem? Or is it, how big is this problem? And a lot of times, like, the stakeholders will say, these are our important pages. And the users say, no, these are our important pages. These are the ones we want to look at. And so one of the things I did in the analytics was look at how are they getting to these pages? Are they searching? Are they navigating? What are they searching for? What is the page they see beforehand? What is the page they see afterwards? And kind of dive into that. There were a lot of deep dives, and even though their analytics wasn't perfect, analytics is about trends, not exact numbers, so there was still information I can learn from it. The SHM had a contractor prior to us come on board to develop a taxonomy, which is really cool. They have a medical journal and a magazine, and they've never had a taxonomy for their medical journal, which kind of surprised me. So the other contractor developed that, but they never had time to test it. So I got to go in and help complete that process. So what I had the users do, what I had the SHM writers and editors do first was tag the pieces of content with the taxonomy terms. Then I had end users do a tree test for them, and I say, okay, this piece of content, which tag do you think you would find it under? And so they navigate through it, G-test it, and say, this is where I would, these are the tags I would find it under, expect to find. So this helped me validate if SHM's writers and editors, if their thinking was matching to the end user's thinking about the content. And we had to actually change a little bit of the taxonomy based upon that study. There was a lot. It was almost a little too deep, and we needed to bring some of the taxonomy terms up and not as many levels. So one thing about the medical industry, it has a lot of medical terms that have synonyms, acronyms, and abbreviations. So we created synonyms and related term mapping to be able to cross-reference those in search results, and also to help provide related content at the bottom of content, so more information that they might be able to need, which they didn't have previously. So since we heard so many complaints about not being able to find anything on the website, we spent a lot of time working on our navigation. So, excuse me, we started the process with 6 users conducting remote moderated card sort. We don't usually do a moderated card sort, but this time I did, and this way here I can really follow up with questions and really learn more and to understand, okay, why did you place that there? What was your thinking of putting that there? The other thing is we didn't use Optimal Workshop, which is a typical card sorting online software. Instead, we used Trello. And the reason why I used Trello for this one is because I wanted at least 3 levels deep of navigation, and card sort only lets you do 2. It doesn't let you get to that 3rd level. So what we had in Trello was we allowed the users to make their buckets across the top, and then we had the cards. If you guys are familiar with Trello, we had the cards that they can sort. So they would put the cards into the different buckets that they named, and then in the cards, in that description, they would write the different types of content that should be underneath that area. So I was able to get 3 levels of navigation using that technique there. This was great for this content, this client. I got some really great gems out of this. Just 6 users, but I got some really great gems out of it. So one user ended up breaking up their thinking process. And they're like, well, it depends what I'm going to the site for, why I'm going there, and I approach it differently. So he was like, when I need educational credits, I'm at home. I have like 2 hours by myself that I'm actually able to concentrate on. And I have the objective of getting such and such class done. I come like really kind of knowing what class I'm going to take. Whereas when I'm getting the latest news about something, I may be listening to some podcasts in my car as I'm driving to work. I may be in the elevator with my phone and I got my email and I'm like tagging something I want to read later or getting little snippets. I got just a short little summary of it. And then lastly on the improvement processes and like what his mental model, that one's much more in depth of how they think about that and what they're working on that improvement process. But without that moderated card sort, even in the interviews, I didn't get that. You know, that moderated card sort, it forced him to think about what the different reasons he comes to the website and how he wants those different types of content organized. So that was a really great gem. Another person went into their career paths, the different career paths people can follow. And SHM didn't have content. They have a little bit of content about careers and career paths, but they didn't. So we learned here is that, like, okay, this is the information you need that you're not providing to your users, and was able to find something to for them to expand on. Even those, you know, like, okay, interviewing, best practices of interviewing, that's like in lots of sites and can be on there. The end users really wanted something that was unique to their situation at a hospital, and they wanted it from a trusted source, and that trusted source was SHM. That's one thing that the interviews really told us, is like they really trusted SHM and what they believed and really thought about them highly. So after the Monterey card start and other research, I developed the sitemap. We validated it with a tree test with 100 participants. And from there, we had to tweak a little bit some of the wording and some of the levels, but we fixed that. In the design and architecture phase, we developed clickable wireframes and style guides. They have SHM has a yearly conference, and we were approaching that time. And during that time, everyone at SHM is just focused on that conference. So we had to kind of like stop and doing any user research then, and kind of not only let SHM focus and get through the conference and after the conference, but also our participants. Their schedules were just disrupted by going to the conference, so they needed time to get back on their regular schedules to be able to then donate additional time to our research. So we're going to end up starting our build phase. When we start that next, we'll be starting the build phase with actual wireframe usability study. Okay, so that's sort of an example of how we changed and modified it, what we selected to do in the variety, also within the budget as well. But that gives you a kind of example of how it went through. Next session, I'm going to take a break for a little bit and give you guys a break, but then we'll start up the next session where we're going to actually do some user research techniques and methodologies. We'll be doing 3, so we'll break up into groups and really get hands-on in doing it, because the best way to learn anything is to actually just do it. And it's also so much more fun. So I guess we want to take a break, and we'll continue getting set up.
All right.
Cool. Thanks.